Dust floated through the beam of a work light like tiny snowflakes that didn't know where to land. Eli Parker's phone kept vibrating in his back pocket, short, sharp buzzes that felt like someone tapping his spine. He didn't look. He already knew it was the bank app, or his ex, or both. His Starbucks cup sat on a stack of broken seat cushions, the lid half caved in, the coffee gone cold hours ago. "Hold up," someone yelled. Eli's gloved hand froze on the sledgehammer. The wall they'd been tearing down, old plaster over brick, had a different sound in one spot. Hollow. Like it was hiding air. The foreman, Donnie, leaned in and knocked twice with his knuckles. The sound came back wrong, too clean. A pocket. Eli swallowed. He didn't know why his eyes stung. Maybe it was the dust. Maybe it was the fact that he hadn't slept more than 4 hours a night in weeks. Donnie pried a loosened brick free. Behind it, in the darkness, sat a metal box the size of a small microwave, wrapped in yellowing plastic and tied with twine like somebody had tried to make it stay put through time. On the front, in thick black marker, were 2 words that made the whole crew go quiet. "Do not open." And under that, a date that didn't make any sense at first, until Eli's brain did the math and his stomach dropped. April 15th, 2009. The year his dad lost the house. The year everything in Eli's life started turning into before and after. The last time Eli had been inside the Riverside Theater, he was 16 and broke in the way teenagers are broke, empty pockets, full future. He'd taken a girl named Cass to a late showing because tickets were cheap on Tuesdays and the place smelled like buttered popcorn and old carpet and something sweet that reminded him of being a kid. Now he was 34, and the Riverside smelled like wet drywall, metal dust, and a past nobody wanted to pay to keep. The theater sat on the edge of Lakewood, outside Cleveland, wedged between a vape shop and an empty storefront with a fading for lease sign. Developers had bought the block. The city wanted revitalization. A new mixed-use building was going up, condos, a gym, a clean-looking coffee place that wouldn't hire anyone like Eli unless he came in through the back door to fix something. Eli didn't hate progress. He just hated what it did to people who were already barely holding on. He worked for a demolition crew called North Shore Salvage. It sounded nicer than it was. Most days were loud and physical and simple, which was a relief in its own way. The complicated part happened before work and after work, when he sat in his truck and stared at the steering wheel like it might give him answers. That morning, he'd been outside his apartment building, trying to decide if he could skip paying the electric for another week. The notice was taped to his door like a shame flag. Final warning. Past due amount, $387.16. He'd opened the bank app anyway, even though he already knew it would be bad. His checking balance looked like a typo. $42.09. His phone buzzed again and he watched the screen show Mara, not calling, just a text. His little sister always texted first, like she could soften whatever she was about to ask for by typing it. "You working today?" He typed back, "Yeah." "Why?" 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Mom's meds are short this month. I can cover some but not all. Can you do anything? Even like $50? Eli stared at the question until the letters blurred. He could picture his mom's hands, the way they shook when she tried to pour coffee. He could picture Mara's apartment, the second-hand furniture, the quiet panic behind her jokes. He typed, "I'll figure it out." Then he sat there for another minute, forehead against the steering wheel, while a single tear rolled down and landed on the worn leather in the same spot his thumb always rubbed when he was driving. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a breakdown. It was just the body doing what it does when there's nowhere else for something to go. He started the truck and drove to the Riverside. At the job site, guys talked about football, about overtime, about who had gotten pulled over on I-90. Eli listened and nodded when needed, but he felt like he lived behind a glass wall. Every conversation happened on the other side. He'd been like that for months. The breakup didn't help. Kayla had moved out in October. Not with screaming or cheating or some big moment that made sense on a movie screen. Just a slow drift and a quiet decision. "You're always somewhere else," she'd said, standing in their kitchen with a dish towel in her hands. "Even when you're right here." Eli had wanted to argue. He'd wanted to promise he'd do better. But he'd been tired, and shame is heavy, and the truth is sometimes a person doesn't change fast enough to keep what they love. So Kayla left. She sent him pictures of the dog for a while, then stopped. Eli didn't blame her. Still, some nights he reached for his phone like it was a reflex and had to remind himself there was nobody to text who would make him feel less alone. That's how life had been: bills, work, sleep, repeat. Small losses that didn't leave bruises but still hurt. Inside the riverside, the crew moved through the rows like ants, stripping copper, pulling seats, cutting through old beams. Eli liked salvage days because sometimes you found things that were almost valuable: old fixtures, vintage signs, brass railings. Little pieces of history you could sell or keep. But the riverside didn't have much left. The projector was gone. The neon marquee out front had been stripped for parts. Somebody had already picked the place clean, the way people do when they know something's about to be erased. Eli was assigned to the east wall, near what used to be the lobby. The wall was patched in different shades where repairs had been done over decades. He swung the sledgehammer in a rhythm: lift, strike, step back. The sound was dull and familiar, almost calming. Then came that hollow spot. It wasn't magic. It was physics. Old buildings have secrets because people put them there, on purpose or by accident. Donnie called everyone over. Phones came out. Even the guys who never took pictures started recording, like the place had finally given them something worth remembering. Eli didn't record. He stood close enough to see Donnie's hands tremble a little as he pried the brick out. Donnie wasn't the trembling type. He'd done time in his 20s. He had grandkids. He didn't flinch. When the metal box appeared, wrapped tight and dusty, the air seemed to change. Not supernatural. Just human. Like a room full of people realizing they're about to learn something they didn't know they were missing. Probably old booze, one guy muttered, trying to make it nothing. Or a gun, another joked, then got quiet when nobody laughed. Eli's phone buzzed again. He ignored it. For once, the thing behind the wall felt bigger than his own mess, and that surprised him. It scared him a little too, because when life is hard, you start to believe nothing is bigger than your next bill. Donnie lifted the box out carefully, like it might fall apart. The twine was stiff with age. The marker words were clear, though, like they'd been written by someone who wanted to be heard later. Do not open. April 15th, 2009. Eli's throat tightened, and he didn't fully understand why until a memory hit him so fast it felt like stepping off a curb you thought was there. His dad at the kitchen table. The letter from the bank. The quiet way his dad folded it like it was a napkin, not a foreclosure notice. The way his dad said, "It'll be okay," in a voice that didn't believe itself. Eli heard himself whisper, barely audible, "That's the day the tax refund hit." Mara again, in his head. Mom's meds. $50. He looked at the box and thought, not for the first time lately, how many things in America were decided by paper and timing and who got to know the truth first. Donnie set the box on a rolling cart like it was evidence. "We call the owner," Donnie said, but his voice wasn't firm. It sounded like someone trying to follow rules while standing on the edge of something. "What if it's something bad?" a younger worker asked. Donnie shook his head. No guessing. No messing with it. Eli finally checked his phone. Not the bank app. Not Kayla. A voicemail notification. Unknown number. Timestamp, April 15th, 2009. His skin went cold, like the building had found a way to reach through time and tap him directly on the shoulder. He didn't play it. Not yet. He just stared at the screen, then at the box, and felt a strange, uncomfortable thing rise up under the fear. Hope. Not the warm, easy kind. The kind that demands you face something you've been avoiding. The kind that says, "Open your eyes." Eli didn't listen to the voicemail until his lunch break, sitting on the tailgate of his truck with a plastic-wrapped sandwich sweating in his hands. The site had gone quiet in that way construction sites do when everyone is pretending not to stare at the same thing. The metal box sat inside a temporary storage crate, tagged and photographed. The foreman had called the property owner, who said he'd handle it, which didn't mean much. It usually meant lawyers and delays and people arguing over who owned the past. Eli pressed play. At first there was static, then a woman's voice. Calm. Tired. Familiar in a way he couldn't place. "Hi. I don't know who will hear this. If you're listening, it means someone finally opened the wall. My name is Ruth Callahan. I worked at the Riverside for 37 years. If you're hearing this after April 15, 2009, then I did what I said I'd do." The air felt thicker. Eli leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I didn't steal anything. I saved it. The theater was closing, and nobody wanted the records. They said it was all outdated. Paper. But paper is how people disappear when you're not careful. So I put them somewhere safe. I hope someone decent finds them." A pause. A breath. If you lost something during the recession, if a bank told you that you failed, there might be a reason that isn't your fault. There are names in that box. Dates. Errors. I tried to fix what I could back then, but they told me to stop. So I didn't throw it away. I hid it. The voicemail ended with a click that felt too loud. Eli sat there long after, staring at the blank screen. His sandwich stayed unopened. The world kept moving around him, forklifts backing up, someone laughing too hard at a joke, but he felt like he'd stepped into a quiet room inside himself. Ruth Callahan. He remembered her now. Not clearly, but enough. An older woman with grey hair pulled back tight, always wearing a cardigan even in summer. She used to work the ticket booth. She called everyone hun and never rushed anyone, even when the line stretched to the door. His dad used to like her. "She treats people like people," he'd said once, which was high praise coming from a man who trusted almost no one. Eli's phone buzzed again. "Mara. Any luck today?" He typed, deleted, typed again. "Maybe. Something weird happened at work. I'll explain later." She replied with a question mark and then a heart. Eli felt a small ache behind his ribs. After lunch, a woman in a city-issued windbreaker showed up. Short hair, clipboard, practical shoes. She introduced herself as Lena from the county records office. She asked the crew what they'd found, took pictures, nodded a lot. "Looks like a time capsule," one of the guys said. Lena didn't smile. "Not exactly." Eli found himself standing closer than he meant to. "You heard the voicemail." She glanced at him, surprised. "They forwarded it to me." "Yeah." "What happens now?" he asked. She exhaled through her nose, like someone about to give an honest answer even if it wasn't clean. "We inventory it. We see what's inside. If it's what I think it is, it'll be complicated." "Complicated how?" She studied him for a second. "You have a personal interest." Eli hesitated. He wasn't used to saying things out loud before he'd practiced them in his head. "My family lost our house in 2009. Same date as the box." Lena's face softened, just a fraction. "You weren't the only ones." That afternoon, she let Eli help move the box. Not officially. Just practically. He held the door while she wheeled it into the back of a county van. It felt strange, being that close to something that might explain years of quiet shame. Before she closed the van, she paused. "We're going to open it tomorrow. There will be lawyers. Press, probably. Can I be there?" Eli asked, the words out before he could stop them. She looked at him again, really looked this time. The dust on his jeans. The tired set of his shoulders. "I can't promise anything," she said. "But leave me your number." He wrote it down with a pen that barely worked. When he handed it to her, his hand shook. That night, Eli didn't go straight home. He sat in his truck outside a gas station, watching people come and go with coffee cups and lottery tickets and their own invisible weights. He thought about Ruth Callahan, alone in a closing theater, deciding to hide a box instead of walking away. He thought about his dad, gone now, and how he'd never stopped believing the loss was his fault. At home, the power was still on. The apartment was quiet in the way that makes your own breathing sound loud. Eli heated up leftover pasta and ate standing at the counter. Then he called his mom. She answered on the third ring. "Hey, baby. How you feeling?" he asked. "Same as always," she said, trying to sound light. "Your sister tells me you're working too much." He almost laughed. "She tells you that?" "She worries." "So do I," he said, and meant more than one thing. Later, he lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, the voicemail playing again in his head. He felt resistance rising up, the old instinct to keep expectations low. Hope had burned him before. It asked for effort. It asked for patience. But something small had shifted. Not a miracle. Just a thread connecting his life to someone else's quiet decision years ago. For the first time in a long while, Eli didn't set an alarm just to survive the next day. He set it because he wanted to be awake when the wall finally gave up the rest of its secret. The room they used the next morning wasn't dramatic. It was a conference space in the county building with beige walls, a long table, and a coffee machine that tasted like burnt paper. The kind of room where big decisions happened quietly, with pens and paperwork instead of speeches. Eli sat in a folding chair against the wall, hands clasped, trying not to look like he didn't belong. Lena had gotten him in as an observer, which felt like a gift and a warning at the same time. Across the table were two lawyers, a records supervisor, and a man from the development company who kept checking his watch. The metal box sat in the center like it was waiting for permission to breathe. When they cut the twine, the sound was small. When they peeled back the plastic, the smell of old paper filled the room. Not moldy. Just aged. Careful. Inside were folders. Dozens of them. Handwritten labels. Dates. Names. A silence settled in that wasn't respectful so much as stunned. Lena started reading out loud. Not everything. Just enough to establish what it was. Mortgage servicing logs. Payment receipts. Returned checks that had never been returned to the borrower. Internal notes about processing delays and temporary holds. Errors, the supervisor said quietly. Systemic ones. The developer's lawyer cleared his throat. We should be careful with language. Eli felt his jaw tighten. He stared at a folder near the top. His last name wasn't there. Not yet. He didn't know why that mattered so much, but it did. He told himself not to hope. He'd learned that lesson. Lena pulled one file at random. She flipped through it, eyes moving faster, her posture changing. This one shows 3 payments made on time, she said. Marked late. Then fees. Then default. She looked up. That's not a gray area. The supervisor nodded slowly. We'll need to cross-check. Eli's phone buzzed in his pocket. Mara again. He ignored it. He was afraid if he looked, the room would dissolve and he'd wake up back in his truck with $42 to his name. They worked through the morning, the air growing heavier with every page. Nobody said shocked the nation. Nobody needed to. The truth didn't need a headline to be loud. At noon, they took a break. Eli stepped into the hallway, palms sweating. He leaned against the cool wall and tried to slow his breathing. Lena came out a minute later. You okay? I don't know, he said, which was the most honest answer he had. She nodded like she understood that answer intimately. We found a pattern. It's bad. Does it help anyone now? Eli asked. She didn't dodge it. It might. Some cases can be reopened. Some settlements might happen. Not everyone. Not cleanly. Eli closed his eyes. His dad's face flickered there. The way he'd carried boxes to the car in silence. The way he'd avoided driving past the old neighborhood. My dad thought he failed, Eli said. He never stopped thinking that. Lena's voice softened. A lot of people did. They went back in. The afternoon blurred into details Eli couldn't fully track. Dates, initials, acronyms. It felt like standing too close to a loudspeaker. The sound was overwhelming, even if the message mattered. Then Lena paused. She held up a folder and looked at Eli. Parker, she said. His heart stuttered. That's your family, she asked. He nodded, throat tight. She slid the folder across the table. You can read it. The room went quiet in a way that felt personal. Eli opened the folder with hands that felt borrowed. The first page was a payment receipt. His dad's name. The address. A date stamped clearly. Paid in full. Another page. Internal note. Payment misapplied. Hold placed. Another. No borrower response. Proceed. Eli's vision tunneled. The room felt too small. He could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. He called, Eli said without meaning to. He called them every week. Nobody interrupted. He kept a notebook, Eli went on. Dates. Times. Names of people he talked to. He thought he was just bad at explaining. Lena swallowed. The notebook might matter. Eli laughed once, sharp and humorless. He threw it out. After we moved. Said it was pointless. The breaking point wasn't anger. It wasn't tears. It was the realization that something true had been sitting behind a wall for years while his family carried a lie like a weight. He stood up too fast. The chair scraped. I need air. Outside, the sky was flat and gray. Ohio winter pretending to be spring. Eli walked until the building was behind him, until his legs burned a little. He pulled out his phone and called Mara. She answered immediately. Hey. They messed up, he said, words tumbling. They messed up and it wasn't Dad's fault. There was a pause. A small sound on the other end. Are you sure? Yes. His voice broke. I'm sure. Mara exhaled, long and shaky. Oh my God. I don't know what it fixes, Eli said. I don't know what happens next. Eli, she said gently. It fixes something. He leaned against a railing, staring at the street below. People crossing with coffee cups. Lives continuing. For the first time since his dad died, the story in Eli's head changed. Not the facts. The meaning. He wasn't standing in the wreckage of a personal failure. He was standing at the edge of a truth that asked him to let go of the blame he'd been carrying for someone else. And letting go, he realized, was harder than holding on. The news didn't explode the way people imagine these things do. There were no flashing lights outside Eli's apartment, no overnight fame. The story moved slowly, like most real corrections do. A local paper ran it first. Then a regional outlet picked it up. By the end of the week, people were using phrases like systemic failure and long overdue accountability. Eli watched it all from a distance. He still went to work. The riverside was almost gone now, just a hollowed shell with the sky showing through where the roof used to be. When he swung the hammer, it felt different. Lighter, somehow. Not because his life had suddenly improved, but because the story he carried about himself had shifted a few inches to the left. Sometimes, that's enough. The county contacted him officially. There were forms to fill out. Phone calls that started polite and stayed careful. They explained that his family's case qualified for review. Not a guarantee. Not a check in the mail. Just an acknowledgement that something had gone wrong and that it wasn't his father's imagination. Eli printed the email and put it on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a dog that Kayla had left behind. He didn't take it down. It reminded him that proof exists, even when it shows up late. One evening, he drove out to see his mom. She lived in a small ranch house now, the kind with uneven steps and a lawn that needed more attention than anyone had energy for. She moved slower than she used to, but her eyes were still sharp. He told her everything at the kitchen table. The box. The files. The date. She didn't cry. She just sat very still, hands folded around a mug that had gone cold. I knew it, she said finally. Not triumphant. Just tired. I knew he wasn't careless. Eli nodded. I wish he'd known. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. He did, she said softly. Not every day. But sometimes. You helped with that, even if you didn't realize it. Eli drove home feeling like he'd put something down that he hadn't realized he was carrying. The settlement, when it came, wasn't dramatic. It covered some old debts. It paid back fees that never should have existed. There was no apology letter that made things whole. Money doesn't do that. But Eli used part of it to pay his mom's medical bills down to zero. He transferred the rest to Mara with a note that just said, breathe. She sent back a picture of herself crying in her car, smiling at the same time. Eli didn't quit his job. He didn't move to a new city or reinvent himself. He stayed in his apartment and fixed the loose cabinet door. He paid the electric bill on time. He bought groceries without checking his balance every 3 minutes. One Saturday morning, he found himself standing in line at a coffee shop near the job site. The place had reclaimed wood tables and music playing too loud. Progress had a smell, and it was espresso. A woman in front of him dropped her wallet. Cards spilled everywhere. Eli bent down and helped her gather them. She thanked him, embarrassed, relieved. It was nothing. Just a small human moment. But it stuck with him. He started volunteering once a month at a housing advocacy clinic Lena told him about. He didn't give speeches. He helped people fill out forms. He listened. Sometimes he just said, "You're not crazy," and watched shoulders drop. One afternoon, while sorting old files, he found a photocopy of a handwritten note. Ruth Callahan's handwriting. Neat, careful. Paper remembers what people try to forget. Eli stared at it for a long time. On the anniversary of the Riverside's demolition, the city put up a small plaque near the new building. It mentioned the theater. It mentioned the discovery. It mentioned accountability. It didn't mention Ruth by name. Eli stood there after work, hands in his pockets, watching people walk past without stopping. He didn't feel angry. He felt aware. History isn't always loud. Sometimes it survives because one tired person decides not to throw something away. That night, Eli sat on his couch, phone in his hand. He scrolled through old photos he rarely opened. His dad holding a paint roller. His dad smiling at a birthday cake. Ordinary moments that had survived despite everything. Eli didn't feel fixed. He still had bad days. He still woke up some mornings with a tight chest and no clear reason why. Healing, he was learning, wasn't a straight line. But he felt steadier. He typed a post online about the Riverside. Not sensational. Just honest. He wrote about the box, about the weight of blame, about how sometimes the hardest thing isn't losing, but believing you deserved it. He ended with one line. If something was taken from you quietly, you're not wrong to keep asking what happened. The comments came in slowly. Then more. Stories. Dates. People saying, "This was us," or "I thought I was alone." Eli read them until his eyes got tired. He turned off his phone and sat in the quiet, feeling the kind of hope that doesn't rush ahead. The kind that stays with you, asks you to be patient, and reminds you that even behind the thickest walls, the truth has a way of waiting.